there's many kinds of software, but there's at least two kinds that I'm concerned about. There's software that is new, and there's software that scales. When you're building a new thing, you need to iterate very quickly, get in front of people.
That's why I'm absolutely opposed to outsourcing when you're at an early stage. Originally, you had one person who basically coded everything, and this made them understand the entire system and be able to tweak it, but it was very inefficient. Specialization is what allows industry to happen.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by HeavyBit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
So what are we going to talk about today, Edith?
We're going to talk about the chocolate, but that's for the end of the episode. At the beginning, we're going to talk about
coconut is a desiccant.
So you've been told. You know, even doctors learn new things now and then.
So, the topic?
The topic is specialization.
How so?
So I think there's a lot of talk about full stack versus full stack engineers. Mm-hmm. And I've heard both sides of this argument, even on our own podcast.
So to define that, a full stack engineer is someone who can write JavaScript, can write Node.js, and knows Mongo?
Well, that's one definition. I think the definition is usually just somebody that can write an entire application.
Sure.
You know, so Chris Gale, who was one of our guests before, talked about how he rotated people between different teams because he didn't really want them to specialize too much.
Mm-hmm. Stripe talks a lot about T-shaped people.
Yeah.
So people who are very, very wide and then very, very broad, very, very broad and then very deep in one specific topic. Like, someone might be particularly good at AI, but still know how to write a web stack. Or use one, at least.
I'm of two minds of this. So I actually got 2 degrees. I got an engineering degree and an econ degree.
Okay.
So part of my econ degree, we actually went back and we read The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which pretty much kicked off all of econ. Basically, specialization is what allows industry to happen. Mm-hmm. Like originally, you had a farmer and his wife, and they would grow sheep. Mm-hmm. You know, they would go out, they would herd the sheep, they would get the sheep fat, they would trim the sheep, the wife would sit, she would spin, make a sweater. Mm-hmm. Great.
Very specific gender roles there.
Oh, maybe it was the wife went out and tended the sheep and the guy stayed home and spun.
Maybe.
No judgments.
No.
So this is basically artisanal sweater making.
Okay.
It is also incredibly inefficient. Mm-hmm. You know, because basically you're talking a minimum of 2 years per sweater.
Right.
When you talk about...
We're definitely getting back to software at some point here, right?
It's getting there.
Okay.
It's getting there. What industrialization did is instead of saying, hey, instead of having one family unit make a sweater every 2 years, let's have some people make the sheep, some people trim the sheep, some people card the wool, and let's have machines that will actually spin it, and then another machine that'll make a sweater.
Sure.
And with this, you can make, 1,000 sweaters in an hour.
Okay.
Are they handmade with love? No. They're made in a factory somewhere, and the factories are probably geographically distributed from the sheep. But allows intense scaling. I think software has kind of come from the same place, where originally you had one person who basically coded everything, who made the database, who made the front end, who made the back end, and this made them understand the entire system and be able to tweak it, but it was very inefficient.
Interesting. So the obvious thing here is that there's many kinds of software, but there's at least two kinds that I'm concerned about. There's software that is new, and there's software that scales.
Yeah.
And so the 0 to 1 and the 1 to n almost.
I think that's a very important slice. So go on. And
so if you're creating a new product, a new startup, a new software category, something like that, you're probably going to build it with a very, very small team.
Yeah.
And the very small team has to be able to do all the things.
Yeah.
Because you want the same people to sort of hold it in their minds.
And also to be able to tweak very quickly.
Right. Yeah. Your whole point is validate and iterate.
And to do that in a very short value chain.
Very, very short amount of time, yeah. So it's much more like creating this artisanal sweater, assuming your sheep are already grown or something like that.
Well, even then you have a really quick feedback loop. You could say like, hey, that wool was really dirty.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Don't take them to that pasture anymore.
Yeah.
And you have that control because that the person is...
I feel our analogy is breaking down here a little bit.
No, I feel like the analogy is only getting better.
So when you're building a new thing, you need to iterate very quickly, get in front of people. But the industrialization, spinning on the loom sort of part of the analogy is when you have 100 million people using your product, and then you start to, or even where you have like 10,000 people building your product, and you start to say, we need to optimize the website. We need someone who actually knows something about databases to take this part over, or whatever.
Yeah, or, our onboarding emails, they were fine for where we were right then.
Right.
But now we actually have the ability to start to optimize them.
Sure. And you can go several layers down. So you start by, maybe we need to rewrite the web server to have lower latency. And then it's like, maybe we need to rewrite this in C. And then it's like, maybe C isn't really that good. Maybe we need to make a new programming language that's better. And you just sort of go lower and lower down the chain until you hit the order of magnitude that you're able to hit with that change.
Yeah, and to go to talk about Dropbox for a second, there's this big trend right now where people are either moving on or off AWS. Mm-hmm. So Dropbox moved off AWS because they felt like it was something they had to take back in-house.
Right.
But so, they were at the scale where it made sense.
Right, exactly. So they got to 10 billion valuation, I think, and then it's like, okay, AWS no longer makes sense for us.
Yeah, but I think there is...
Because they have the specializers.
They have the specializers. I think there is... So I'll argue and agree with you. I think people sometimes confuse what stage they're at. Mm-hmm. And they prematurely optimize either for scaling up or they think they have to continue to do everything in-house.
Well, I think this is the sort of the role of the full stack engineer or why people are so into full stack engineers. Because when you're super early, you need to not have to pass a feature to several different people to get it done, because that's a lot of communication overhead. You really want to say, this is a feature we need, and someone who can, bring up the AWS instance, configure the database, write the code, write the front end, and then there's a feature that comes out of it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm absolutely opposed to outsourcing when you're in an early stage startup for your core engineering.
Right.
If you're a software company.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, outsourcing is ludicrous. I keep meeting these people who tell me that they have a great idea for a product and they just need to get it to a good outsourcing team and then ship it. And it's like, and then what happens after the first iteration or the first round of feedback? What are you going to do then? And they talk about outsourcing to people who are in a different time zone,
different language, different culture.
Oh my God! But like, just imagine the feedback loop on someone in a different time zone.
Oh, I've done that. We outsourced before to India, and it was different culture, different. Every iteration took at least 3 days.
Oh, wow.
I think people fail to realize how much in a startup, how much of the product is everything, not just the code, but everything around it, like the documentation. Like a lot of our customers read our documentation before they sign up, they say, not to brag about our docs, but people say your docs are lovely.
Well, for a dev tool company, docs are marketing material.
Yeah, they have to be good.
Yeah,
and so people think we'll just ship a product and then the money comes in.
Yeah.
So I'm arguing passionately for non-specialization. But I think people cling to that for too long, and then they realize that there is a point where it makes sense to start to break apart roles.
Well, I think the first area that you start to see that specialization is around the front end. So typically, you'll get someone who can do some portion of the front end. So they can either design UXs. So the role of the designer is there's UX designer, there's graphics designers, there's people who can write HTML and CSS.
There's interaction designers. And typically on the front end of a web stack, you end up with like a PM who's doing some sort of UX, or maybe that's the founder or something like that, or maybe that role is kind of goes in with the engineer as well, who's particularly skilled at that. And then someone is writing the JavaScript and the app kind of portion of it, and then someone's constructing the CSS that styles it, and you end up with this conflict because usually a designer and an engineer and let's say a founder type person or a PM type person all have overlapping skill sets and all feel that their contribution or sort of ownership is around a certain part of it. And you end up with feelings like a designer who's being told to just, style this and make it a bit pretty or something like that, I think is how it usually manifests itself. Oh gosh, she just opened up like 15 years of memories in a second.
Oh no. Anything you want to discuss, or shall we leave that for your therapist?
This podcast is my therapy. I think there's too much to say in a single sentence, except for I think people need to feel ownership of a particular area, and they need to have boundaries and ownership. And sometimes the worst part is that you have somebody in a role who is absolutely the wrong person for that role. And that's incredibly difficult.
Yeah. I guess the important part of that is that there has to be sort of a team ownership, in the sense that if one person individually owns it, then someone else can't own it, right? That, you know, ownership is a unique thing that someone has, and that's kind of the point. That at the same time, the team has to own it, but there has to be someone who's making a decision. You can't just operate on consensus all the time.
That's interesting, because I've heard of some companies that seem to operate on that. And I'd say that my own company, so Launch Darkly, we are pretty consensus driven.
There's nothing wrong with being consensus driven, but at the end of the day, you have to have one vision and you have to be going in one direction. And that's true at a company level, and it's also true at an individual feature level and an individual or at a product level.
I think we're about to go into Edith's therapy, so let me talk about more general things.
So you talked about front end and back end and that sort of thing as specialization. How else do you see people specializing?
Oh, I mean, an entire organization, once you start to get bigger, starts to specialize. You start to have people that just write emails. You start to have people that just do analyst relations. You start to have people that just do PR. I mean, you just start to separate out these various roles.
So within software, so we talked about like front end and back end. The things that seems kind of obvious to me is that there's now the people who build mobile front ends.
Yep.
There's the people who scale and who focus on the DevOps side of things. So one of the points of DevOps was that the developers now do ops, right? And I think that's kind of died.
Oh, it's funny because I've been going to a lot of DevOps conferences because feature flags are part of DevOps.
Yeah.
And every DevOps conference I've gone to, people say, DevOps has no definition.
Okay.
Originally, it was the fact that devs did operations, as you said. And now people say they're like, recruiters are like, we get a lot of requests for DevOps people in Atlanta.
Right.
Do you know any DevOps people?
Right.
Which is kind of like a total perversion of the original intent.
I mean, the way that I thought this was going to go was that we would stick dev in front of everything. And, you know, there'd be dev sales and dev marketing. and
well, that's a dev evangelist.
Well, I mean, dev evangelist is
basically
evangelizes the you're right, exactly. So you stick dev in front of everything, and then once you've got like dev legal and dev janitor, then everyone realizes it's dev in front of every role, and you drop it, and it's just, you know, janitor. Because the world of DevOps has become so large, like there's so much to know around AWS and Google Cloud Platform and OpenStack and queues and reliability, and you know, it goes all the way down to, you know, how many ops are running into this thing, and all the way up to, you know, how do I write an Ansible config. So the ops, now DevOps side of things, has become so large that I think you can definitely have a small team that starts to build their own at the start, but you're really going to get, it really doesn't take that many users before you start getting a need to specialize around that.
Yeah, I'd say though, it has gotten easier. I mean, I remember you used to have a dedicated ops person just to tend to your server. Like you used to physically have somebody build you boxes.
Sure.
And you just don't have that anymore.
Right. Yes, until your Dropbox size.
Yeah.
And Dropbox has someone who's building servers.
Yeah, but I mean, that's immense.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's funny that there was this feeling around 2000 that, you know, it took a lot of money to build a company, right? So people were raising 5 million Series A because you had to build the boxes and you had to put them in your servers, and, you know, someone was actually racking things and so on. And then around, I would say, 2009 to 2011, there was this time where you could build a startup for very, very cheap, right?
Yeah.
So you could do it for like, you know, people are raising rounds of like 500K and you getting somewhere with that. And I think that has completely changed again because the size of the ecosystem that people are building for is just immense. So now, when you start a company, you need some DevOpsy stuff. You need someone to write a front end thing, which is really quite separate from how people are writing back ends, and you need iOS, you need Android. They might be two separate people. I think we've gotten to the scale of things where it's gotten fat again, and it's not so much lean, scrappy companies that, you know, where two founders build it all themselves. I think we've gotten to the point where the standards and the sort of things that people expect are actually much, much larger than that again.
Well, so I agree with you, but I disagree with you.
Okay.
I think you do need more than you used to have. I do think that's true. I think you can be very choosy about where you invest first. Like, I think you can either say, hey, we're going to be mobile first, or we're going to be web first.
Okay.
Like, I think,
Well,
I think
you do
Android
need to make that decision.
I think Android is not making money for people, so they're You can go longer without an Android app.
Interesting.
Unless you're specifically making the decision that you're going after the Android market.
Really, I haven't seen that, or I don't have an Android. Are people just leaving the Android app for some time later?
It depends totally on what you're doing. I mean, if you're a consumer app, I think you do have to invest in platforms. But I mean, even when I was at TripIt, like we never built a BlackBerry app.
Right, of course, yeah.
I mean, and I was the person, we looked at the numbers, we're like, this does not make sense for us.
Right.
We had a third party who used our API to build a Windows app, but it never made sense for us to build it internally. So you could still be choosy about what you're doing, even if you're a mobile app.
The flip side of this is that while the platforms get much, much larger and many more of them, the tooling around them get much better. I was reading today someone's tweet about how they built their iOS app in 9 months and they built the Android app in 1 day because they use React Native.
Yeah.
And in that sense, while the breadth of things that you need to learn, I heard the term recently, JavaScript fatigue. While the breadth of things you need to learn is getting broader and broader, at the same time, there's kind of consolidation around things. And React and the world around React is one nice consolidation at the moment.
Yeah, and also I think people don't realize how good they have at it, that stuff is in the cloud and you don't have to build installed stuff. Like we used to have to worry about app servers, web servers, and databases.
You don't now? Well, I guess you don't need to deal with app servers so much anymore.
Like what app servers, web servers, and databases our customers had.
Oh, okay, yeah. I remember build scripts that dealt with like 20 different Unixes.
Yeah, I mean, so we had an on-prem solution that, it wasn't on-prem back then, it was just our software. And I was in charge of the supported platform H, which was literally like what versions of Sybase and WebLogic we would support.
Oh, that's a disaster.
Yeah, and that was a lot of our effort, was just making sure that we worked on different platforms.
Yeah.
Just don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, everything's a HTTP-based API, basically.
Yeah.
Until it's not. So the thing I was playing with recently was the Slack API, and to talk to Slack is not actually a HTTP-based API anymore. It's a WebSockets-based API that I don't know how it works because there's a library. But in order to hold a conversation with a Slack bot, and I guess it's for latency reasons, it's a WebSocket connection, and it's not really a HTTP-based API anymore.
I'll give another. So I got an engineering degree also. And I was hanging out with my engineering friends who were doing robotics engineering. And they were talking about a really interesting breakpoint in their company, which is where they made a working prototype. And now they're trying to scale up to make thousands of these in China.
Oh, no.
And just what a different mindset it is.
Oh my God, I looked into this. That world is fucking crazy.
Well, and so my friend's the VP of engineering, and he's classical, like, you think I'm a curmudgeon, this guy is a curmudgeon.
Yeah.
And he's like, they need to stop taking parts off my prototype. We're trying to document everything and get it to China, where it's going to be in an assembly line where, people who are going to have to put these parts together, and they won't just, what you were saying about how at the very beginning, you have all this time to make all these decisions about tweaks. Well, when you're assembling something on a machine line, you have the exact opposite.
That's a really interesting world, and a lot of the sort of continuous delivery things around hardware devices are super, super interesting. You can be building a hardware device in San Francisco, and you can sort of, solder things and fiddle with them and all that sort of thing. But when you need a component, you often have to wait like a week or two. Versus when you go to Shenzhen in China, a new component is like you go to these massive components warehouses and you get like a component an hour later. And so it's all about the turnaround time. So you can get the turnaround time to be super, super low prototyping in Shenzhen versus prototyping in San Francisco. And then if you're prototyping in Arkansas or something, you're even more fucked. Yeah. And then it's the same thing with when you want to get something out, you want to get 1,000 of something. And then when you get 1 million of something, you can use companies that outsource it, like a company called Flextronics, or you can use like, small scale factories that'll produce, thousands of them a week or something like that. Or you can go the whole way to like, produce a CAD design and talk to a bunch of different factories in China that will give you competitive things. And then you go for dinner with the factory owner. That's how you know that you're actually getting into the factory. It's fascinating. And like the whole world is fucking mental. And I'm so glad I built software.
It's funny. So I worked for a hardware company. We made it basically a Fitbit for plants.
That sounds like something the world needs.
Hey.
It sounds like the punchline at the end of a Silicon Valley episode.
Hey,
what are you guys making? We're making a Fitbit for plants. So,
I was gonna make something about
I'm making a Tinder for dogs.
a killer for mosquitoes.
Nice.
So it was before the Fitbit really exists, but we help people grow better plants, which is actually a very human, deep urge, and that's how we stopped becoming hunter-gatherers and became a higher civilization.
Yeah. No, it's valuable, I'm sure. You definitely didn't waste 2 years of your life on that.
I found it incredibly useful because I learned so much. People still use our Fitbit for plants.
All 6 of them.
Oren bought 5 himself.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah. The quantified self in some form.
Oren was a persona we had, the gadget guy.
The gadget. Ah, okay.
So Oren bought a bunch for the Heroku office.
Right. Of course, for the Heroku office. The Heroku office is like the definitive gadget guy.
Yeah, I had the gadget guy.
Yeah.
Who wanted to measure his plants. Mm-hmm.
If you're any company that's building any sort of gadgetry, the Heroku office is an excellent first customer. They will buy whatever you have.
You should just go over there outside, and if they don't buy it, perhaps you have a real issue.
Yeah.
And that's where really I learned that hardware was hard and software was soft, because we had to manufacture in China. We actually made at a doll factory.
Yeah.
Like they were making like little dolls, and then we did a run of about 10,000 units. Something went wrong with those units, and it was a hassle.
Oh no!
Like we had to open every single unit, fix it.
Right.
Whereas with software, just ship something else.
Yeah. The analogy of like architecture and engineering to like construction or civil engineering, and it's like if you want to rebuild the foundations of a bridge, that's a thing you will never ever do. Whereas if you want to rebuild the foundations of your software architecture, that's somewhere between a 1 and a 3 week project.
Well, I'd say that this runs into trouble because sometimes that's actually like a 3-year project.
Okay, yeah.
Like sometimes business users and even in software users think that everything is mutable when it's not.
Right. Well, it depends how good your API contracts are.
That's
To a certain extent, you can lift up a house, redo the foundations, and then put the house back down.
It's a good metaphor. It depends whether you're also how much you're redoing versus elevating that house, maybe to
like putting it on stilts or something like that.
Yeah, or maybe putting a underground pool and a water slide.
Yeah.
All right, we've tortured this metaphor to death.
Right.
Specialization, I think it's all about the right stage. I think so. To go back to the robotics example, they had a working prototype.
Yeah.
They'd proved that people liked it. I think if they'd prematurely scaled and started putting something they'd built that wasn't very good into the hands of everybody, it would not have done them any good.
Well, it's interesting to look at this thing as sort of the stages of VC financing. So you have a seed round to build something. And it's a small seed round, and it's to validate that there's some kind of market for something, or that the product can be built in some cases. And that's a thing where you need like very little specialization. You might need like one specific specialization. If you're building AI, you might need people who are super into AI or know something about that probably. Whereas when you get to the next stage and the stage after that, it's really about expanding, and it's really about getting much more specialized people who are able to do that specific job much more specifically. In the hardware example, the seed round is often to cobble something together, and then you do your Kickstarter as the next source of funding, and then you do your Series A to really bring that to market in some more meaningful way.
Yeah, I think people underestimate how hard Kickstarter campaigns are.
Oh yeah, no, it seems really hard now. Like
Right.
I think there's probably some Kickstarter guru out there who's like the marketer that you bring in to make your Kickstarter campaign work, and everyone else is just kind of guessing.
Yeah, so another guy who went to my college, Dan Shapiro, has a couple of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns ever. And
He's the Kickstarter whisperer.
he runs a company that makes his current company makes 3D lasers.
Oh wow.
Glowforge.
Okay.
But he wrote a really good blog article about just how much work it is.
Yeah.
Like people have this delusion that you just...
No, I mean like you need to get PR for your Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
You need to have a viral marketing thing. You have to...
You iterate on your video.
Of course. Yeah, multiple times, I'm sure.
Yeah. Like people, I think people have this misconception that virality just happens on its own.
There's a wonderful essay. I think it was either Joel on Software wrote it, or it was on the Joel on Software forums or something along those lines. It was about the guy who He was a software engineer, and he, deeply loved building products the right way and all that jazz. And one day he quit his job and he sat down in a room to write the new piece of software. And he wrote something beautiful and elegant and gorgeous and all that jazz. And then he set it out there for people to come.
The better mousetrap.
I think it's not important what it was, but he set it out there for people to come, and then nobody came.
Well, Paul, haven't you ever heard that story?
It's a better mousetrap?
You build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door.
No, I haven't heard that.
Oh, that's a famous American saying.
Yeah.
My joke just
Yeah, no, it's cratered and ruined my story. So the guy has built this thing, and he makes a website for it, and nobody comes.
BetterMousetrap.com.
And then he goes back to his job a little bit sadder and a little bit worried about the world, and he goes back and does the same thing as he was doing before, but now the spark is gone. And I feel that this is sort of the analogy for, obviously it's for why you need sales and marketing. But in the Kickstarter world, it's like it's not just that you need a little bit of sales. You don't just need a little bit of marketing. You need to totally dedicate yourself to the thing that you're to your go to market. And a lot of people find it much easier. A lot of engineers in particular who want to start startups find it much easier to build more code when something's not working. Let's write a bit more code. Whereas versus something's not working, can we get a co-marketing post with this larger channel or something like that?
Yeah, thank you for publishing our blog post when we were very young.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing people need, right? It's
which was the Joel test for continuous delivery.
Right. Yeah. That was a great article.
I think it's interesting when you were talking about Kickstarter, because even in Kickstarter campaigns, there's specialists.
Oh yeah. Right. Heaven forbid you want to do some other campaign that's like Kickstarter.
Like an Indiegogo, or?
Well, I don't specifically mean Indiegogo, but I mean there's. You can do a Kickstarter campaign, but there's also a much larger world of sort of crowdsourcing and viral campaigns of some kind where you're doing it without the Kickstarter channel, I guess. So, but yeah, if you're trying to do a Kickstarter campaign and you don't have Kickstarter.
I think people also underestimate total addressable market versus value of their product.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There are many products that are immensely valuable, but have a very small number of people that want them.
Okay.
I think we talked about this in another episode. So you might have 100,000 people who really, really want your product and will pay a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And Kickstarter is more suited perhaps to something that millions of people want. Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting set of sort of polarizing things. So there are some markets where a very polarizing product succeeds. So the U.S. presidential election at the moment, right? A very...
Oh, no, I'm really going to need therapy.
Yeah, whatever. It's...
Well, you can always go back to Ireland.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of Canada, actually. It looks very nice up there.
I hear it's cold.
I hear it's very free up there.
I hear it's cold, particularly in the winter.
Well, yeah, maybe the winter I'll go to Mexico. I'll alternate between your neighbors. Also,
when the snow melts, there's a lot of mosquitoes.
Anyway, certain election systems like the one in the US favor a polarizing candidate. In Kickstarter, it's a kind of a polarizing product as well. You have to have something that people really, really love. And it's okay if 95% of the world hates it, but you'll still succeed on Kickstarter. But if you want to succeed in the world at large, you have to be something that everyone loves and not just a very, very small number of people love.
Well, it depends on what the product is.
Yes, if you're targeting particular niches or that sort of thing. The lesson is that if people hate your product, but a small number of people love it, that can still be a really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a classic Dave McClure thing.
Oh, yeah?
It's better to be hated than to be ignored.
Yeah. Pokemon Go is a lovely example of this. There's a bunch of people who fucking love that thing. And there's a lot of people who seem to really, really hate it.
Who could hate Pokemon?
I think there's a lot of get off my lawn mentality going on.
Who could hate Pokemon?
I guess people with lawns.
I think I'm at peak Pokemon.
Oh, you think you're done with it?
I've caught all the interesting things.
I tried it and I really didn't get anywhere. I expected that. So I was away when Pokemon Go came out, and I expected that when I got back to San Francisco, there'd just be Pokemon people fucking everywhere. And I've barely seen any.
It was scary when I was in Sydney.
Oh, yeah?
So I was in Sydney for a conference, and I went down to Sydney Harbor, and there were literally Pokemon zombies. Because I guess the opera houses were like, so like
They're just like wandering around into traffic and
it was literally like there was this light rain and there's about 500 people all playing Pokemon. And
Right.
you knew they were Pokemon players because they had the battery pack and they had the app open and they're all like sitting there like killing all the Pokemon.
So I haven't
and I
seen
would
this-
silently judge them except for I was playing Pokemon too.
Is it my imagination or is this not really a thing in San Francisco? Like I've seen there was something in Fisherman's Wharf, there was some event up there and there was an event in like Dolores Park where like 30,000 people went, but I don't see it on like a daily basis.
I think there's concentrations where there's more Pokemon. Mm-hmm. And that's where those people doing it are. Like I would go running through the botanical park in Sydney and there's this one area where there's just a lot of people hanging out playing Pokemon.
All right, we're 27 different tangents off here.
Well, we've specialized.
We're special. All right, our next podcast next week will be a little more generalized, I think.
Well, let's sum up. I think specialization is good at the right time. And Paula's gonna...
And cut.
You never heard of a better mousetrap?
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by HeavyBit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about HeavyBit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.